Each one of us are those essential golden threads in the tapestry of humanity. And so each one of us doing our essential work at this time, it's never been more important because each one of us are light bearers. Each one of us are the light bringers. And so as we clear out our conduits, we are allowing more light, love, and healing to flow through us to the rest of the world.
Welcome to the Past Life Awakening podcast. Today, my beautiful guest is Stephanie James. She's the author of Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. She's a psychotherapist whose work is really diverse, and we'll get into that. But first, welcome to the podcast, Stephanie. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. It's a joy to be here with you.
Fantastic. So, as I said, you're a psychotherapist, but your work is diverse in that you do EMDR and trauma healing, which is often what psychotherapists do, but then it's quite spiritually orientated. You do shamanic and psychodynamic techniques, kundalini, and so you have a really spiritually orientated approach to your work as well. So we'll get into that soon, but before I do that, I'd like to mention that you've also got your Igniting the Spark podcast. You're a documentarian with When Sparks Ignite. You host in-person retreats and do speaking events. And you're an active communicator on all the social medias. So for people that want to check you out, what's the best way that they can just fall in love with you right away and go and check you out now?
They can check me out at The Spark. Stephanie the Spark is my Instagram. They can look at Stephanie, I think it's stephaniejames.54 is my Facebook handle. But if you just look up Stephanie James. Yeah. And the easiest way to find all my stuff is to go to stephaniejames.world, my website, and all of those things are available there.
Yeah, fantastic. So all those links will be in the show notes. So go and check them out. As a conventionally trained psychotherapist, with all these eclectic interests, was that something that you had a spiritual awakening to later? Was it something that you felt was always there in your early life that maybe even inspired you to do conventional training? So how did that begin?
I have this picture of myself, Mark, when I think I'm probably about 4 or 5 years old. And in that picture, I'm beside another little girl. We're both dressed in these really funny blue kind of furry coats. And I have my hand gently on her shoulder, looking at her in this very compassionate way. And when I show my friends that photo now, they just laugh and go, this was always who you were. I was this person who always wanted to know what was going on behind someone's eyes. I had that empathy, I had that compassion, and I had spiritual experiences ever since I could remember. So the two have been very hardwired for me. And I think after going through clinical training, I felt after grad school that I didn't get to where I am right now right away. It was a path and a journey like we all take. My first job was I ran a cognitive behavioral therapy program for paranoid schizophrenics, only for seriously mentally ill. And from there, it went on to, I worked in a school for 10 years. And then finally, the last 18 years, my career has been as a psychotherapist where I was just in my own private practice. And that's where I got to really start this beautiful interweave of combining the spiritual elements, whether it was pranayama breath work, definitely meditation. That's always really been strong in my life. I've been meditating for 28 years. And so weaving that in has been an essential piece. And I think as I opened up and learned more about whether it was, I just became probably 6 months ago a Reiki 2 practitioner, took a Kundalini yoga class last year, and really intense Kundalini practice throughout the year. So it's as I learned these things and open up more deeply to these things, I want to share them with my clients. I want them to experience that profound healing that I also have experienced as well.
It sounds like it's been quite a seamless integration for you. Is that an illusory thing that it seems seamless looking back? Was there any sort of conflict that you had with, I had my initial conventional training and then I would then question these things, but eventually come to accept them bit by bit? Or was that easy to, or so, and even if there wasn't an internal pushback, Was there any external pushback as you start introducing these things? And colleagues might say, Kunda, what? What are you doing?
Right. What's fascinating to me, Mark, is I have had so many, I mean, I'm talking hundreds of people that when they come to see me, what I hear the most common is either God told me to come here or an angel guided me to be here. I mean, just this over and over and over. So I feel like from right away, I know so many of my clients already have their own spiritual orientation. And I think that helps to guide my work. Now, I have people that are my clients that I do not do the spiritual aspect with because my sessions, and also as a transformation guide, I do a whole separate coaching business. So I really try to be right where the client is at. So I'm not going to introduce something to someone who comes in and says, hey, I'm a Southern Baptist. This is the way I think. This is the way I feel. This is what's essential to me. Then I'm going to honor that. And then the people that come in and say, hey, I'm open. And as things open for them, and they say, I'm wondering about this. And what do you think about that? And so I'll bring things up. Now, have I been nervous to bring things up? 100%. There's times where I thought, oh, especially, from the book, there was a time where I was doing healing with a client and really had my first sensation of seeing someone else's parents come in, as spirits come in and sit beside them on the couch. And I was so hesitant to say anything at the end of the session. But because that client said to me at one point, I feel like my mom and dad are here, directly after I had witnessed them, their energy sitting down beside her on the couch, I said, okay, I have to share this with her. And if she decides, okay, Stephanie's nuts and I don't want to come see her again, I was willing to take that risk because I felt like to share the love and that incredible energy and connection and the direct things her father was saying to me, which ended up being so incredibly beautiful and so true, like evidence-based truth, that I am so thankful I did share.
Yeah, I love that, and it's interesting for people to consider that that you separate it in a way, which is I have my conventional way of doing it. If that's how people, that's their belief structure, and that's what they want, that's what they get. But I also offer this other thing, and you're not forcing anything or blurring those lines. You have clear boundaries, and people can select that. So you're working with the beliefs that people have, but then there's also that courage to maybe I'm stepping over a line here, but if you give me permission and we can explore that, and then it turns out that then there's a respecting of boundaries and a courage in taking it a little step beyond and coming up with something extraordinary. I think people can really learn from. So fantastic. And so the book is actually, yeah, so the book is Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. And so can you explain what that means? And so, and everything after is sort of, it's getting into afterlife. So it's a big topic. So can you break that title down for us?
Well, I will. I have to give you, Mark, a little bit of history first of how that title was actually different.
Okay.
The whole way that the book came in was I was interviewing Neale Donald Walsch on my show. And we couldn't get to the interview. We were chatting and chatting and just had this heart to heart connection and just laughing. The beautiful thing is it was all recorded. So I have this all on record. And at one point in that just personal conversation, you see him he gets this download, it just drops in. And so at one point he says to me, Stephanie, you're going to write a new book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And this book is going to have global implications. And I'm going to endorse this book. And at the time he said, I think the book's called I'm Dying to Tell You About Death. Now, I'd never planned on writing a book about death.
Okay.
But when the guy that talks to God, I mean, I know we all do, but his
Yeah.
books, The Conversations with God, says to you, you're going to start, a new book. Well, I showed up the next day. You better believe I showed up at the keyboard.
I mean, everybody talks to God, but not everyone talks to the publishing gods like he does. He's one of the
Yes,
best-selling
no
writers
doubt.
of all time. So
Totally,
when he says
totally.
this is the
So
title of the book, you're like, okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, exactly. And I, Mark, the incredible thing about this book is that I wrote this book in under 6 weeks. My first two books took 9 months each to write. It was like gestating a baby, each one of those books. But this one and all the people that are in it, Wayne Dyer's daughter and wife and Academy Award winner Stephen Simon and Ariel Ford, everyone started coming out of the woodwork to be a part of that book. And it was at one point, my agent was saying, Stephanie, things are so rough in the world. Publishers are saying, another book about death. I think even though the book really isn't about death, as you know, it's so much about life and sacred living. But the title was throwing people off. And so she said, we need something that is going to really ignite people and they can, whether they're 25 or 95, they're gonna hear it. And literally it just dropped in. I mean, it was almost like I was joking, but I meant it. I mean, I just said, okay, well, how about your big fat juicy life and everything after? Because that's what the book is. We have this incredible big fat juicy life that we get to live. And that's not the end. That death is not the end. It's just the next chapter in our book of eternity.
Yeah, and a short transition to another form of life in many ways, as comes up a lot of times in the book. So I'm curious, maybe if we backtrack a little bit before we charge forward. One big question that I like to ask people is, so you mentioned I had this clinical training and I've taken on these other modalities as I've progressed. But it's also even to become a psychotherapist in the first place, and or to have some of those spiritual interests initially. Were there some key books that maybe you found when you were 8, 10, 15, 20 along the path that really made you think this is the kind of thing that I want to do? So key books or maybe key teachers along that way.
Sure. I would say my early teachers, I can remember even in grad school, Deepak Chopra, he was one of the first teachers, definitely Wayne Dyer. I used to watch Wayne Dyer on PBS, not to date
Yeah.
myself, but
Right.
um, and then, it was things like the Celestine Prophecy. I'm trying to remember, Putting on the Mind of Christ, which is actually not about religion. It's about how there's three different levels of spirituality. And then having some of those experiences, I mean, as you read in the book, when I was going through my aunt's death, she was reading and sharing with me a lot about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And so there just started to be like this flood of books that came in, like Marcus Borg's um, Getting to Know Jesus Again for the First Time, or let me see what else. I mean, at the time, the Secret, of course, was one of those door openers. Um, God, I mean, there's so many. Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah.
I could go on and on. I mean, and then
Good.
Tara Brach, Jack Cornfield,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
many.
the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a really interesting one for me. I spent quite a bit of time living in India and being on Tibetan Buddhist retreats and amongst those people and read that book. And it is quite esoteric and it's quite, going through the bardo and quite specific. And I was really interested to see that you mentioned that's something that people are using in hospices to calm the fears of the dying. And you mentioned your Aunt Gwen, and so like how do they adjust it so that it's accessible for an audience? And can you tell us a little bit about that as well? Because that's really, a good. So the book is about your juicy life, but it is also about the juiciness that seems to come when we're able to face the fear of death and see what's on the other side and dying well is or we live well if we can die well when we get there, and if we're able to face death well, then it helps us to live. And so can you tell us a bit about how that related specifically even to your aunt and bringing in all of this information, but how did she process that just with her as a being going through that challenging moment?
How did she process it, or how did I process it?
Well, both.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
my aunt's journey was one of those powerful things that really did help inform so much of what this book is about. And as you see, as you know from reading the book, she's a byline, she's a through line in
Yeah.
the book. And, it started long before, the end of her life, I guess long before, being maybe a few months before her death. But I share in the book the story about my daughter, Acacia.
Yeah.
And Acacia is the Greek word for immortality, ironically. It's the tree of life in Africa. And I say in the book as well, I had no idea when I named her Acacia that she was the one that was going to teach me about immortality. And so I was a single mom. So I had kind of the setup of this scene was I was a single mom, and I was actually in the bath when the phone rang, and little Acacia brought me, in those days, it was those huge portaphones. And so I'm in the bath talking to my mother, and my aunt had breast cancer, and for 5 years really was not doing treatment. She'd had a mastectomy, but she didn't want to do radiation or chemo. So finally, at 5 years, when they went that day to do exploratory surgery on her, they opened her up and the cancer was just everywhere throughout her. And so my mother had called to say, they basically had sewn her back up and said she only has a few months to live. And so at that point, I hung up the phone and started crying. And little Acacia walks back in to the room, and she sits on the side of the tub and she says, "Why are you crying, Mama?" And I said, "Oh, sweetheart, Mama never wants anyone to die." And she just looks at me with these wise little eyes and she shakes her head and she's like, "But we never die, Mama." And then even though we didn't go to church or anything like that, I just thought, oh, she's thinking of heaven. So I said, "Oh, honey, I know we go to heaven." And she just looks at me again and shakes her head. And she's like, "There's no heaven, Mama." She said, "When I was a light up in the sky with God." And then she pauses and says, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" And I'm just like, "Oh my God, your other mother, Dorothy, that was my grandmother who died when I was 13 years old. And my grandmother had remarried the year after to Lucille. We called her Seal. So the only person Acacia knew, I was 25 at this conversation, the only grandma she knew was Grandma Seal. I had no pictures of my grandmother. We didn't talk about her, but Acacia knew that name. And she said, "Your other mother, Dorothy, her light was in the sky with me. And so God took some of her light and put it in my light, and I got to come down and be your daughter." And it was just like, oh my God. I called my mom and we both started crying again because we knew it was true. I mean, it's like out of the mouths of babes. It was just like, oh my God. So that was, that's one of the things that if I needed proof about the afterlife, absolutely informed me that that was true.
Yeah, it's really interesting that there's a combination there, which is kind of there's no heaven, but I'm also a light with these other beings that are around. And part of me is reincarnating, but part of me is this light. So it really speaks to sort of overcoming another kind of dualistic conflict that people can get into. So, and it does speak to reincarnation. So, what happens afterwards? You do mention in the book one of my favorite books. So I asked that question: what books really influence you? And one of the books that you mention in your book is Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. So for a lot of people listening to the Past Life Awakening Institute, that's a big book for us awakeners in the past life realm. So so is that's a book that you mentioned? Is that something that you had read prior and thought, okay, that's interesting, but then your daughter says something and it's like, okay. So what's your take on even
Yeah.
past life regression as a modality and how that eventually becomes something that feels, quite real and experiential?
Well, I really have had it's so interesting because I know and I want to share with your audience um, the experiences that I had already had that informed me of past lives. The first one being when I was 6 years old, and I was not dreaming; I was fully awake. I was downstairs with my parents, and they were watching some movie. And at some point, and it was happening in Europe. And at some point, there's a police chase. And the sound of the sirens, which are very different than the sirens in America, took me back. Like I was instantly back in a memory of being, what I have to feel like was being snuck out of probably, I would say, like Nazi Germany. Um, Hearing those sirens, being on the floorboards in the back of a car with a scratchy wool blanket over me, looking up and being very, very scared, and looking up and seeing the rain coming down on the windows and someone telling me to keep down. Now, to be 6 years old and have something that strong that I remembered my entire life, and I pull it up today just as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I've had several of those throughout my life. And I have to share too, I think the fact that my orientation as a little girl, at 5 or 6 years old, our housekeeper, who was actually this beautiful Catholic, large Latina woman who I love, when she would hug me, I would just, dissolve into her body. I mean, she just gave the most wonderful hugs. And she was more than just, a housekeeper. She would cook for us. And I just loved B. And I would sit with her when she would iron my father's shirts, and she would tell me stories. And so and I mentioned that she's Catholic only because I don't know that Catholics believe in reincarnation. I don't know, but she did. And she would tell me stories of taking care of my mother and my Uncle Chuck in many different lifetimes. She told me about lifetimes when she was a man. So when I would have a memory or I would have a dream, I didn't think, oh, this is weird. My orientation was, of course. I just had this knowingness. I already had this knowingness at a very young age, and a very profound, and again, vivid memory. I can tell you exactly where I was standing when I had the thought, again, this is 5 or 6 years old, and looking at my grandmother's old antique hutch and going, oh, we're never born. Oh, like I don't remember being born, and I don't remember dying. And it just keeps happening. Like this just keeps going on, and having a very profound sense of that. And so throughout my life, as I've had these certain experiences, and when I've had dreams that are past life dreams, they are profoundly different in texture, than a regular dream. I mean, there's a different consciousness to them. And I'm very aware, I have a second stream of consciousness that's saying during those times, like, this is how you died, or this was, what happened at the ending. So
that's interesting. So that witnessing stream of consciousness allows you to because you remembering past lives implies you're remembering a past death, which can then be scary. And we may react to it or judge that and say, I don't want to see that scary, difficult thing. I thought I wanted to know about a past life. I don't now that death's involved, I don't want to know about it. But what you're saying is there's a capacity there to have a witnessing consciousness that makes it manageable. So, if you can't handle it, you won't get it. And if you are getting it, it's because you can handle it, regardless of whatever fear that you think's coming up. And if that's happening at an early age, and that there's a kind of inherent courage or trust involved in that. So is that something you're aware of at the time? Or looking back, you think, wow, I was pretty resourceful for a young kid?
No, I mean, to me, it felt, very, very natural. I think what you're saying too, when you're talking about having courage to see some of these deaths, I mean, I was definitely much older when I had other dreams, one where I was drowned. And, from having so many conversations with so many other people that have had near-death experiences or past life regressions, one of the things that has been comforting to me is people say death itself isn't painful. The death isn't painful. It's really up into that point and the anticipation of it that is the most painful. And even witnessing my death at the dream where I was drowned, I was taken into this stream by these two men on either side of me. And again, in these past lives, I always laugh because people love to be like, I was Cleopatra, or I was, Napoleon Bonaparte, or whatever. But I was just an average person. But I very much had the sense through several lifetimes that I was someone who would speak up and speak my truth. And there were times when people didn't like that. And so this particular situation, I was being punished. I mean, I was being killed because I was speaking out. I don't know what it was that I was sharing, but I knew that what I was being punished for. And in this experience, they took me down to this river where there are all these reeds coming through and held me underwater. And I remember witnessing myself drowning and not feeling afraid of that. I remember actually a peace coming over me internally as the person being drowned. And then this very, to me, it's funny, but because I do have that rebel in me that's still a part of who I am. But it was like this last act of defiance in that life because I had drowned, but I could hear their conversation above the water. And one of the men was going to stick his head underwater to make sure I'd stop breathing. And so when he stuck his head underwater, my last act of defiance is I opened my eyes. And so the last thing I witnessed in that life was just like his open mouth, like screaming and all these bubbles coming up. And that was it. And that's when I
Wow.
woke up.
Fascinating, because a lot of people do come to me for past life regression when they have a glimpse in a dream, or they have an auditory trigger, like an unusual siren, and they'll get a glimpse of what was happening, but then they won't know what the end of the story is. So they'll want to gather more narrative. Well, they will know what the narrative is, but they haven't been able to provide a therapeutic resolution. So that's quite common for that to happen. But for you to have these experiences where you're getting quite complete narratives with a beginning, middle, and end that you're able to therapeutically resolve just speaks to the inner healer. And you mentioned actually about, clients being guided to you by the universe. Do you feel in some ways that the universe is kind of giving you past life sessions that are quite complete and therapeutically skillful? That's what it sounds like to me. Am I reading into it too much, or do you think that's part of what's happening?
No, I absolutely believe that that's true. I really believe that's true because I believe, as I'm sure you experience, Mark, as well. Um, I believe as healers, the clearer our conduit is for that divine, whether you want to call it the universe, I call it the divine to come through me as me and through me. Um, I have to keep doing my work and I have to keep being open. So we're also given these, what I consider gifts or blessings of some of this knowingness so we can help guide others through the process.
Yeah. When I first started doing meditation, I'd have, I couldn't meditate. I was failing to meditate, but I was going into hypnotic states where the universe, I call it the universe doing hypnotherapy on me. So that years later, when I sat in hypnotherapy school, I was like, well, I've done this myself. Like you just know that like technique, like very good technique that it has. So it's amazing to see you having that there. And I'm curious as well how maybe you integrate that with beliefs like, do you have you mentioned your housekeeper being Catholic. Did you have a particular religious tradition that you and then had to integrate it or have these ideas sit side by side somehow?
Yes, yes. So great question. When I was little, we went to First Presbyterian Church. And I remember, though, even at that time, Mark, not buying into all of it. And again, probably around the age of 5 or 6 years old, I remember in the summer going to the neighbor was doing like a Bible study camp for us, like a 2 week Bible study camp. And each day she would ask us if we were going to accept Jesus into our hearts. Now, this, I'm not trying to sound blasphemous here, but I remember as a little kid going, I'm going to say yes, because I really want that little plastic Bible pencil sharpener, and that's what you got. You get a little gift. Um, but even though I knew there was something, I always believed there was something bigger than us. From a young age, my mother would talk about, our guardian angels, things like that. So I had this spiritual orientation, but through junior high, I went to First Christian Church because I loved being a part of the youth group and all my friends went there. And so, I mean, that kind of religiosity was a part of my life. And then I would say from high school on, I was just like, I just can't buy into all of this. For me, it wasn't making sense, because for me, spirituality was so much bigger than a church or a book. And by then I'd started to read other religious texts, and I could see some through lines in all of those, and just started saying, these are all pointers. There are truth in all of these, but they're just pointers to the great mystery. And somehow we limit what this message truly is about if we say it's us or them. It's there's this inclusion and exclusion that made no sense to me at all.
I love what you're saying about you said it a few times. I didn't buy into all of it. But what you didn't say is, I therefore rejected it. You were able to take Christ consciousness, the community, Buddha Dhamma Sangha, we call it, and if you're a Buddhist. And so you've got the community, I'll take that. You've got the love of this being, I'll take that. There are maybe a few details that I can't buy into all of it, but you're able to keep so much of it. And then, so that, and include other things as well, which is powerful, because I think people really get stuck in dualistic black and white, all or nothing thinking, and throw out a lot of good stuff. And I just love this idea of, you don't have to take all of it, and it's okay to gather some other stuff. And things don't have to be that contradictory, even if they appear to be at one level. So actually, you mentioned this mediumship at a point. I was wanting to come to get into that, because there are various other forms of religiosity that people have certain spiritual beliefs. They reject religion or the church, but then they take a very religious position on whatever new age version of spirituality they adopt, but then go right back to a sort of either or manner of thinking. So what I'm thinking about here is there are mediumship is something which you have mediums in your book, Susan Geisman, famous, well-known medium. And I was recently talking with Alison Dubois on her podcast, and I noticed that there can be an idea that it's sort of an either-or, which is you die and then you go to heaven, and then you'll just wait around for all of your soul group to die, and then you meet them, and only after they've all died do you then think, okay, now we can start reincarnating, because we have to wait here in heaven to meet them, and then we reincarnate. Or other people say the Bardo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, says it's 49 days and then you're out and you're reincarnating. So which is it? And it seems like there's a debate and a conflict between these ideas. But and so for you, like, what do you think as you see this apparent contradiction, how you reconcile it, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the interesting things in talking about, as we were just talking about religion and moving, or integrating, I guess, that
Yeah.
is, I would say in high school too, was where I really started to believe that I felt like heaven and hell were constructs that someone came up with. And that for me, true heaven and hell were experienced between our ears, that we created states of or hell here on earth, and that we really could create heaven on earth here, depending on what we chose to focus on. So for me, I guess I go back to part of what Acacia said. For me, it's the whole light in the sky. And I've had so many incredible experiences that it's making more and more sense to me now. Even after writing the book and talking with Sage Dyer, was one of the people that she and I really spoke about this, because she didn't want to feel like her son Julian had just come back as her father. And I said, well, what about, and I told her the story of Acacia, what about if just some of your dad's light is in Julian, but Julian's his own soul? And she was like, oh my God, I love that. And I guess that's my experience of it. I don't know, of course, the big T truth for anyone. My understanding is that light or that energy continues. I don't know how long it sticks around. I love the idea of thinking that light, if you think about it, going back to source, it doesn't just mean it's one thing. That source light might be emanating in many different ways and in many different dimensions, all at the same time. So yes, could someone die and experience their loved one being right there? I absolutely believe that. And yes, might some of that person's light be in another incarnation simultaneously? Yes, I believe that. So that's what I really, I guess, what really resonates with me.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of looking at it, partly because I agree with it just so completely. I think it's such a great answer to a lot of people. I think they have this question. So I think that's where people get stuck and they do start throwing out one because there seems to be one contradiction and therefore they sort of have to choose teams. But I love the fact that you're saying it can exist simultaneously. So yeah, so that's my experience as well, as I do between lives regression, past life regression, and it's something that I'll see that someone will die, cross over, be met in the light, go to the between lives, be met by their grandmother who died 60 years ago, but she also reincarnated 59 years ago, but she's in the light and she's reincarnated simultaneously at the same time. So this idea that you've got to be in the Christian church or a New Ager or, and throw bits out that it's just so inclusive and simultaneous. So yeah, that's fantastic. And it's very interesting in and that view in itself brings peace to people, I think, because there can be this analytical confusion, and I also like none of us really know the big T truth, but that's an experience that I've had doing this kind of work, and I think it's a great insight that you've got there. So you'd mentioned Wayne Dyer and her mother had some ayahuasca ceremonies as another way of connecting. So this is something which has become uh, pretty popular over the last 5, 10 years. So actually, what are your thoughts on plant medicine, that kind of thing, and how that's developed, its role, and then if we can specifically get into how that worked with sage and the dyers, that would be
Yes,
interesting.
yes. Well, of course, in my field, it's fascinating to me how people are using psychedelics to truly heal anxiety, depression, and ayahuasca journeys, to really, I think again, it's these are accesses, they're portals to the divine. Just like anything, I think they could be easily abused. So I think that it's really important in speaking about psychedelics or ayahuasca that it's not, this is not about just recreational. It's like if you use it as a very ceremonial, um, not this is not like a weekend, let's just go have fun. It's really these are sacred plant medicines that have been used for thousands of years. And so I do think they're portals to the beyond. I have had clients have incredible experiences. I'm not a psilocybin therapist, but I have therapists that I know that are. And I think they're amazing portals to healing. And it's so evidenced, it's so researched. We know.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make. And it's also, to note it's not necessarily, or what some adventure that I can have. So in the case that we're talking about, it's at a time in her life where it was specifically, quite needed and quite called to it. And it's not, necessarily, hey, let's have a fun, interesting experience. It's I'm really facing up to the hard realities of death and grief, and I feel called now that this is really a healing tool. It's not even necessary that I want to do it. It's I just need to heal and expand myself and not suffer. And if that's a vehicle that to do it, great. And so was that part of the energy with which the Dyer family approached it, or
Yes, yeah, absolutely. When I
yeah,
spoke with Marceline, which was Wayne's wife,
yeah,
um, her ayahuasca journey was really to connect with him. And yeah, she was still deeply grieving his
mm,
death. And he appeared to her several times. And so to be able to connect with him in that realm, I think for her was so reassuring. And of course, now I have to say, without psychedelics too, Karen Noe, who is a phenomenal medium as well, has had Wayne coming to her for years and has, been with the Dyer family and been such an incredible communicator between the two. And I think for Marceline, those experiences were so deeply healing, the ayahuasca experiences and also the Karen Noe experiences, because they're in both. There are things that were happening that there's, I love the thought, like, you just can't make this stuff up. There are things that Karen Noe knew. There were things that she was experiencing that were just, again, evidence based, saying, yeah, this is real. Wayne's on the other side, but he's still right here with us.
Yeah, there was a part in it which I really loved as well, because I think when people think about reincarnation at a sort of a simpler level, they often think, oh, Wayne's coming back in another body. And that very literal, you're getting reborn and you're kind of the same person. And I love the way that was addressed. And it said, literally asking, like, are you going to come back and do more work, carry on Wayne's work? And Wayne motioned to the bookshop and said, Wayne did his work. The reincarnation of Wayne will not be the Wayne part two.
Right, right. Yeah, that's exactly it. Marceline had seen these bookshelves and they had all of Wayne's books in them. And then, like, in a moment, they were all gone, to truly signify, yes, even though I'm coming back as part of Julian, he is not going to carry on my life's work. That is absolutely open.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to notice. And so you mentioned mediumship as well. And so that is something where, there are so many ways of connecting. And so, that's something you did actually touch on. And you even say a couple of times, you say, I'm not a psychic or medium or a clairvoyant. And yet I'm not sure I'm convinced about that, Stephanie, because
I know.
throughout the book, you say you're clairvoyant enough to know to make peace with your grandmother at 3 a.m., which is an odd thing to do, just before she passed. And
Yeah.
uh, and so maybe can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that just makes me laugh because one of my incredible girlfriends, Lisa Campion, is also a renowned psychic. And when she first started a brand new podcast that was Psychic Stories, I was her first guest, and she announced it as, Stephanie is one of the most psychic people I know. She doesn't believe that. She just thinks it's intuition. But it really, I have to laugh and look back and go, wow, I've been having these experiences my entire life. And, and Mark, that's part of the reason I wrote this book, is because I don't want us to be afraid to share our stories.
Mhm.
So I do think it's important, yes, to share our stories. And I guess for me to also own that, yes, I would call it like a seer. I've been a seer my whole life. I would see energy. I would see these energy imprints all through my life, standing at the door.
As you say, a seer, I lived in India for 5 years, so a seer is quite a specific term. And in India, they call it a rishi. And that's where we get the word or the place Rishikesh, which is the town of seers. And in your book, you do quote Osho, who is a great Indian teacher, and meeting with a holy man, Sidi. He had broken
Mm-hmm.
English, but had a profound effect on you. And so the role of holy people and other seers like you. And so what was it that made you quote Osho? And can you tell us a bit about, your experience with that other person? Because again, if he has broken English, it speaks to the fact that it transcends the conventional scientific kind of training that we have and our analytical mind that wants to figure everything out. But there's something else happening there. And we sort of see beyond language and science and mechanisms into something else. And so, what kind of profound energies and experiences do you get from those rishis from the old country of India?
Yes. So, first of all, I have read so many quotes of Osho and have just been so blown away. And I know he's very controversial here in America. You were saying that's not the same where you are.
He's,
Um,
I mean, he stirred a
what's
few
that?
things up, and he did stir up a little bit of. He's a bit of a troublemaker on purpose in India, but he's pretty well regarded and respected. And he just his actions in the United States, I think, were just a bit confusing. But he's very well respected now And he's really known more for his works than the whole drama around the situation that happened in the US. So they separate the art from the artist and recognize that his art was incredible. And it sounds like that's what you've been able to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, much like our conversation we just had about religion and spirituality and taking those golden threads from whatever is presented. And
Yeah.
so his golden threads are extremely beautiful. And the situation with Sidi was one of those, again, phenomenal serendipitous things that have happened in my life. And I was at a week-long school in San Francisco. And this has been, oh my gosh, 20 some years ago. And when I was at the school, it was a Sufi school. And so they were teaching us how to be healers, really bringing divine healing in through us, and give that healing, help to share that healing with another person. And they kept talking about Sidi. And Sidi is a holy man who works on the Mount of Olives. He's the keeper on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And his son lived in Marin County, which was right across the Golden Gate Bridge from where we were. And my parents had also attended this school years before, and they had gone for 2 years, where every couple months they'd go for like a 3-day weekend. And so they had talked about Sidi. I knew about his incredible just gifts, spiritual gifts. And so at the school, they said, well, sometimes Sidi comes to America. We'll let you know if he shows up. And second to last day or third to last day, they said, oh, Sidi's here in America. We'll see if he comes. Well, he never came. And so I was so disappointed because I was so excited to meet this incredible holy man. And at the very end, we were walking out and I was talking to this beautiful teacher, one of the teachers, Noreen, and she was saying, like, how did you like it? What did you think? And I'm like, oh, it's all been incredible. The only thing I was disappointed about was I was so hoping to meet Sidi. And she says, oh, well, we're headed over to his son's home right now. Let me call him and see if you can come with us. And she said, he's very straightforward. So like, he's very direct. So you don't have your feelings hurt. If he says no, it's just a no, and that's okay. And so she went around the car to have privacy to call him. And I was just there, just like basking in the sun outside, in this beautiful day. And I just remember her walking around the side of the car and holding her, hands open. And he says, welcome. And so it was like, literally felt like this almost out of time. When time starts to take on this different dimension and it just feels longer and broader and wider. As we were driving to his son's home, everything just started to take on almost like a mystical, it was like a mystical experience. Things looked illuminated. The closer we got, it was like sound was different. Everything started feeling different. And we get to this home and I don't have a lot of memories, Mark, about that. I mean, it was like walking into something that was so high vibrating. All that I truly remember is sitting on this wooden floor, and he was sitting, there's probably about 14 of us. He's sitting on the sofa, and it was this broken English. I mean, he spoke for probably over an hour. I don't know what he said, except for the essential message that came through. That, of course, in my heart, I feel like, I know, and and our listeners know, but it resonated like at a cellular level. And he was saying, in his broken English, there's no Catholic, there's no Jew, there's no Muslim, there's no man, there's no woman, there's no death. It is all one. And it was just like, whew, it gives me chills still right now, because it hit me at the deepest level. So that
Yeah.
was one of those beautiful experiences that it just transcended time and space.
That's fantastic. I mean, I love asking about books. We love writing books, reading books. There's a certain point where felt personal experience through spiritual practice becomes indispensable. And if you can get into the energy field of profound spiritual people or just really good healers, then that's really recommended. And your book has exercises. So even as you're telling this story, I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking, I'm thinking I shook the Dalai Lama's hand and had a profound experience which changed, was a big part of me continuing on the path. And other people can think, if they're younger, maybe I need to book some tickets, or maybe I need to go to this person who's coming to my town. And so I recommend doing that kind of thing. But also, at the end of the day, it is all within us, and they're pointing us towards something that's within. So in your book, you've got tapping in exercises at the end of the chapters, which is a fantastic idea. And so one that particularly struck me was the experience where you have talking about facing death. And so again, it's nice to have, an intellectual understanding of things so that when someone says something profound, we can grasp it. But there is that thing of a visceral experience and for a lot of people, that is seeing a grandparent laid out in their coffin. And so what was that experience like for you? And what is that what is the lesson that we learn from that, as a lot of us will have had that?
I think that one of the things when we experience someone lying in their coffin, the most familiar thing that I hear back from people is, that's not my grandmother, or that's no longer my grandfather. That we're really able to see the separation between the spirit and the body. And the body really is the host. It's the host of this beautiful light that we all are. And so it's one of those things that for many people, it's important to see that because it's closure, where they go, okay, this chapter is over. And I think one of the things that I invite people in this book to do so often is, how do we lean into these uncomfortable conversations? How do we lean into exploring, what death is like? Not that we want to experience it, not that we want our loved ones to experience it, but even the exercise that people have about what do I want to have written on my epitaph? Some of these things where we start thinking about, oh yeah, one day I'm not going to be here in the physical form. Because what that helps us to do is to befriend death. That death truly, because it is, especially in America, the number one fear. The number one fear people have is death. And think about what our lives would truly be like if that was not a fear, if that was not this subconscious fear. It really allows us to be more present in this sacred moment. I mean, you want to talk about living your big, fat, juicy life. The present moment is where the juice is. The present moment is where we can breathe into this existence. And you're just bringing in through all of your senses things that you are not able to if you are worried about the future or you're ruminating about the past. And so many of the exercises too in the book are, how do we bring ourselves right here? How can we bring ourselves in alignment with the present moment? Because as we know, that's where the divine is. The divine is in our breath. The divine is in this moment. And that's where we have access to it. And when we're there, the fear of death dissipates. Now, it's not about ignoring death. And I have an entire chapter on growing through grief, because this isn't also about a spiritual bypass. It's not about, oh, let's all just feel good. We'll hold hands, we'll sing Kumbaya and pretend death doesn't happen. No, it's that death is going to happen, and we are going to grieve, and we are going to hurt. It was only a little over a month ago that my favorite uncle passed unexpectedly. And I got that early Sunday morning phone call that you go, there's no way this is good. And I was so crushed. And even last week, I'm out walking in I live on 5 acres here in this gorgeous countryside in Santa Fe. And I'm walking, and I just had a sense of him. And even though I know I feel his spirit being very free, at the same time, I said to him, I love you so much. I am grieving that I'm not going to see you playing the ukulele next Christmas like you have my whole life. I'm going to miss your physical form. And I think those are important things for us to acknowledge, that we can be in the phases of grief. We can experience profound pain, because that's also the juice of life. It's all of it. It's the whole experience. It's like Rumi's poem, The Guest House, welcoming whatever shows up, like this life is a guest house. So whether it's a sadness, a meanness, or a depression that comes, welcome them into your home, meet them at the door laughing, treat each one as an honored guest. And I love the last line of that poem. It says, we treat each one as an honored guest because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And so knowing that our full experience, the joy and the ecstasy and, experiencing love and all these things, and deep dives into sometimes what feels like some dark places or the dark night of the soul or brokenheartedness, that's a piece of this too. And that it's all beautiful and it's all part of what we signed up for in this human experience.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so grief's painful, but it's not part of the good bad spectrum. It's
Yeah.
helpful in what it teaches us. And for me, when I was 16, just they said, go and say goodbye to your grandmother. And I walked into the room and I said, well, how can I? She's not here. It was just her body lying there,
Yeah.
and it was just so obvious and just a profound experience for me. And one of those first times, you're not the body, but it's just so she's not there. That's not her. That's only her body. You realize, that her body's 1% of her maximum, of what she was. And the funny thing about grief and death is people don't have to die for you to lose them and for life to never be the same again and to feel a great deal of grief. So you tell a very personal felt story with your own life at 13 with your dad. And so it is, besides like my grandmother's not here, where is she? And so you had a relationship with a lot of highs and lows, all these ups and downs, goods and bads. But then there's this question of how has your relationship with your father improved since he's transitioned, which speaks to a real transcendentness. So like that's one of the questions. Ask
Yes.
me this question. It's an amazing question. So like how do you even have this as a question? And what's the answer?
Well, in a nutshell, to summarize part of my father and I's relationship, because I think it's important for context here,
Yeah.
that growing up, I was 100% until I was 13, an absolute daddy's girl. I loved my father so much. I followed him around like a little shadow. If he was out raking leaves, I was holding the bag to put the leaves in the yard. If he was working on his workbench, I would be sitting beside him and he would literally just give me nails to hammer in a board so I could I just wanted to be with him. And so when my parents divorced, it was my father leaving my mother was just this kind of golden childhood shattered. I think I speak about it in the book. I mean, it was
Yeah.
one evening where it went from this happy childhood that we knew to my father saying, I'm in love with another woman. And, this horrible scene with my mom tearing out of the driveway and we're woken up, my little brother and I staring out the window. He's 10, I'm 13, and our whole family has just exploded. And our golden childhood was irreversibly broken and shattered at that point. So because I was such a daddy's girl, and my mother, of course, after 18 years of a loving marriage, um, was, she was very emotionally unstable for a while after this. I moved out with dad. Naturally, I mean, I followed him everywhere. But in very short order, we moved in with this other woman who then very shortly became his wife. And it was very clear that I was not a welcomed part of the equation. Even I think maybe at 15 years old, I was told she considered me the other woman. So just to give you an idea, from that point on, I was no longer allowed to speak to my father alone. I wasn't allowed to be with him alone in a room. And until the day he died, I wasn't allowed to speak to him alone on the phone. So I speak about this as my father was one of my greatest loves and one of my greatest pains. And I did move out at 16, back in with my mother. My father was very angry and didn't speak to me for a year. And so there's where the story starts getting rocky. There's probably about 10 years after that where things were incredibly painful. And I went through my life, Mark, trying to earn my father's love again. I was trying to recapture that golden childhood love where I felt loved and adored and, knew I was good enough. And so I was doing it in all the wrong ways, all these external ways. If I just get good enough grades, if I just have the right job, if I can just look good enough, if I have the right partner, maybe I can be lovable. But there was so much pain in there. And yes, after grad school, I reached out to my father. We hadn't spoken in 3 years at that point. And I said, Dad, this is crazy. I have the same degree now that you do. We have so many, I love you. We have so much in common. Please, let's heal this, whatever this is. So I did for several years have a relationship with he and his wife, but it was the same of you can't talk to your dad alone. You can't talk to him on the phone alone. Always was conditional. It felt like very conditional love. And it was very, very painful. There was so much judgment from them. And at one point in my life, 6 years before my father passed, I had finally come to the point where I was like, I don't want to get off the phone and cry. And I don't want to get off the phone and carry this energy with me for the next week. I'm like, the money that I'd spent in therapy, trying to deal with that over the years, I'm like, I just was at a point where I was like, I'm going to love me. And I had learned actually at that Sufi school is where I had gotten a very strong message. You've been trying to be perfect your whole life for your father. And now at the time, you're trying to be perfect for your husband. Stop trying. And so I was like, I have to love me. I know this is an inside job. And so in my book before this, Becoming Fierce, I talk about how do we disconnect with love. And that's what I did. I mean, I absolutely honored my father, my stepmother, the gifts that they gave me. And I said at the very end, like, I love you both dearly, and please don't ever contact me again. I mean, I also said these are the things that were painful for me in my life. And there was no blaming. I owned, what my part of it was, but also here's the reality of a relationship that's not healthy. So when my father actually, when he had his final stroke, he was in the hospital, and my brother flew out to Austin to be with him. And it was about that time, I think, because between the time that Dad had the stroke and was in the hospital and then right after he passed, 12 nights in a row, I had dreams of him. Every night he was with me. And in these dreams, it was so funny. Sometimes, Mark, it was so benign. We were sitting there playing cribbage. He had taught me how to play cribbage as a young girl. And in this dream, here we are, shuffling the cards and pegging the board together. And but I just knew, like, I felt him very clearly. And it was shortly after he passed that, oh my goodness, did things start happening. The energy in the house, my ex-husband and I were both just like, what is happening? Because we had a new stove and a new dishwasher, and all of a sudden, we'd had them for about 3 to 6 months. All of a sudden, the clock would totally change. And then the date would change. And then the dishwasher would turn on, like, for no reason. Like, no, we never preset our dishwasher. And then there was a light, and I still have this light. It's actually the one behind me. It would all of a sudden start flickering. Now, these are all like, wow, maybe these were something wrong with the electrical circuits in the house. But then it was even more than that. As you know, Mark, I would go out to my car, and my automatic car seat, would be pushed all the way back. And the first time it happened, I thought, what was my husband doing using my car? He's got his own car. And when I asked him, he's like, I didn't use your car today. And then it happened twice in one day. And we just, so we just started going like, wow, Dad's here. And what was incredible, Mark, is I really had the experience of the purity of my dad's soul, like beyond personality, beyond his conditioning, what has come through and came through right away, and I still feel with me, is truly, I mean, I feel so loved and so connected to him. When I was getting ready for actually Suzanne Giesman to come on to my show to interview her, I was walking home one day listening to her book, The Awakened Way, and it said, you know, you can ask spirit, you can ask a loved one's spirit to come back and let you know that it's still there, you know, at any point. And I remember taking my headphones out, and at the time is when I was going through the breakup of my marriage a year ago. And I was saying, Dad, you know, I just really want to know that you're here with me. Like, I'm really going through this hard time. And I want to know you're still here. And I got back home and I started making dinner, and my dog and I were sitting on the couch, and I put on a movie. And pretty soon I hear something in the other room, and I'm listening. I can't tell what it is. And I'm like listening. And all of a sudden I realize, oh my God, it's the dishwasher. The dishwasher was on again. And I was just like, hi, Dad.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there were
Fantastic.
3 dishes in it, Mark. I mean, there was no way that it was set, you know. So it's really been comforting. He's come through other mediums. I was interviewing Marla Freeze on my show. At minute 26, you can see it in the video. She says, oh, Stephanie, your dad's here. And as she says this orb goes across the screen, not up or down or diagonal, like literally in this wavy line. And she's like, oh my gosh, did you see that? And I just start laughing. I'm like, I couldn't miss it. Like, you couldn't miss it. So his presence is so with me. And so that's the beautiful thing, I think, too, Mark, as you know, it's like we can heal these relationships even if our parents or our loved one has passed. We don't have to do all the work here on this plane,
Yeah.
because what we're trying to get to in the work anyway is this deep level of heart connection, love, and understanding. And
Mm.
it's as if when they pass, it's already there. There's no work to be done.
Yeah, I love the image of the dishwashing machine, like cleaning up any old messy residues and cleaning things off. But also, it's that, you know, when you're doing forgiveness work with people, I love that, you know, you've got boundaries, and there are certain there is a tough love, or I just need to, due to the conditioning, due to all the things that have happened, the circumstances. There's a part where and I think there's some things that happen in other contexts that may even be unforgivable or require that kind of boundary. And it's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult to say, I forgive that person for what they did. And that's where past lives may help, because maybe roles were reversed. But when you get into that, the part of the karmic, the finite self is very hard to forgive, and we probably need to establish a boundary. The karmic self, it may balance out, but then there's that infinite self or the soul, which is then, you know, you can forgive them for they don't know what they do, but that's them in this life. But then there's that other part of them, that light part of them, that knows perfectly and is loving and playful and does not need to be forgiven because there was never a problem or a suffering cause. And there's that part of your soul that never really suffered, but there's a part of your body that did suffer here and learn. And so a lot of that comes down to, you know, forgiving the world and the universe for putting through us through all these trials. So that big question, you know, why do we have to come here and suffer? But for me, a lot of it is, and we're going to get on to learning to trust. And so I think trusting that no matter how dark and painful a lot of things are, that ultimately there is a light and a spark beneath and beyond all of that, and that everything's kind of okay, even when it definitely isn't, it kind of still is without contradiction simultaneously. So does that make sense? And does that to you?
Yeah, I love everything you just said. I do feel like our souls signed up for this particular incarnation. We agreed to come into this world of duality for
Mm.
whatever and whatever way we wanted to experience what I consider, you know, the source, which is, to me, at times this is almost funny, because if we're all one, and I believe we are, then it's like we're just coming down as one of the trillions of cells that are in that one body, just like we have trillions of cells within us. So it's like one of the God cells, if you will, one of the source cells comes down to experience itself in this duality. so that it doesn't have to be labeled as good or bad. If we can just look at it and hold it. And one of the things that I speak about in the book is this thing of, I truly believe it's almost like these negative things, I'm putting air quotes here,
Yeah.
that happen to us. It's almost like they're these preset alarms, just like we would set alarms through the day for things that we needed to tend to. And so in our lives, maybe there's a natural disaster, or there's a big breakup, or there's a car accident. Maybe those are all just these preset alarms that when they happen, they're an opportunity for us to either wake up and we can experience life in a fuller way. We can wake up to the essence more of who we are. Or, our other option is we can always choose to hit the snooze button, but that we have a choice. And so maybe they're invitations to awaken. And I know, because I've gone through incredibly hard times as well, it's painful going through it. And it's hard to go like, oh, what's the happy lesson here? It doesn't feel that way at the time. And yet so often we can look back and say, wow, that was the catalyst for awakening, or that was the catalyst for me to make this major change in my life. And so what if those things actually are blessings? What if they actually are invitations to our deeper and more divine truth of who we really are?
That's fantastic. I think that is when people get that, that's a real level of spiritual maturity. Like we all get older, we don't all necessarily grow up. And there's that part where, well, of course not, where I'm daddy's little girl. But then suddenly you're somebody's mother, you know? And all of that. We play all the roles and we can get stuck on being a daughter, but then we're a mother and then we're a grandparent or whatever it may be. And so, and then let's just bring it back to sort of to conclude it to now, you've told us, shared so much of your journey and speaking about making a change. Now you've arrived into beautiful Santa Fe. And there's a story there about learning to trust, which I'm curious about. And being in the present moment, which is where you are now. You've only been there for a month or two.
Yeah, yeah. So I moved here March 1st, and I can't believe how it came together. Um, I speak a lot in Becoming Fierce and in this book about, there's something very important about following our inner GPS. And that's our internal guidance system, which I think is the divine guiding us. And it's been so much in my life. And so just in a moment, because I have to share the prequel of this, because I had only had this divine calling to move one other time in my life 32 years ago. And when it happened this time, I was in a therapy session with a client, and that thing happened that we were just talking about, when time kind of takes on this different experience in the moment. And the voice just said, you're moving to Santa Fe. I mean, it was that clear and just dropped in. And it was like, okay. And the reason that for me, it was just like, yep, I am, is because 32 years earlier, when that voice happened again, or for the first time, it's only happened twice in my life, but I was up skiing with a bunch of girlfriends up in Vail, Colorado, staying at my aunt's second home, having the biggest blast. Everything was great. My life was great. I was working in Denver. I was the only one that wasn't mastered level at the time. I hadn't been to grad school yet, who was on the therapy team, adolescent psych unit, worked with 4 of my best friends. Everything was great. But the night before we were to come home, I get that hit. And the voice says, you need to move back to Fort Collins. And it was so strong and overwhelming at the time, I just started crying. I'm 25 years old and I'm just like, okay. And I was a single mom still at the time. And I went to go to bed, and the gal I was sharing a room with, she said, what's going on? I said, I don't know, but this is so strong. I've got to follow it. And I don't remember dates very often, Mark, but I will always remember this one, because I woke up the next day and it was January 14th and my lease was up February 1st. So I called my mother and I said, Mom, I've got to move back to Fort Collins. I know I don't have a job, but I'm going to go. I'm going to give my 2 weeks notice tomorrow. And she said, well, that is really ironic, because our renter isn't renewing his lease. They own several other homes, rentals. And she said, so there's a place for you. So we'll just, get you in that house. And I said, awesome. So I do that. The next day I go back, I give my 2 weeks notice. I pack up all my things. I do not renew my lease. Move to Fort Collins. Within the first week I had a job. But here's the thing, Mark, 3 weeks to the day of moving back to Fort Collins, I get a call from one of my girlfriends. And she said, Stephanie, we have all been laid off work and the adolescent unit is closed. And the front page of the Rocky Mountain newspaper said psychiatric abuses charged. And unbeknownst to us, there were scouts going out. This is before managed care all around the nation, getting kids to come into treatment. And then they were getting $5,000 kickbacks for those kids. So, of course, all illegal. My girlfriends not only lost their jobs, but that adolescent unit under that hospital never reopened. And so I would have been single mom, no job, just signed a new lease. And it would have been so incredibly stressful and difficult. And instead, it was like I was just being taken care of. So when the hit came in, yeah, it was, I think, late January, because I mean, within a month, I had everything packed up. I sold most of my things, moved here, found the perfect place, everything serendipitously. Again, I've got a beautiful community of friends that I've already had here. So it was just like landing in my soul family. But the little synchronicities, Mark, even still, like when I called my property manager for my office to say, hey, I know my lease goes to the end of June, but I'm moving to Santa Fe, thinking she's going to be like, well, you can keep paying rent. Instead, she says, I'm so excited for you. We'll just consider this your 30 days and then I'll send you back your full deposit, which she did. So, I mean, little things like that that were so beautiful. When I found this gorgeous casita, this gorgeous place on 5 acres, I called one of my girlfriends that lives here, who's one of my dearest soul sisters, Sedina Capanelli, and her husband, George. And she said, Stephanie, do you realize you live 9 minutes away from us? They literally live just down the dirt road. So, I mean, talk about dropping into community and dropping into this next chapter of my big fat juicy life. That's what's unfolding now.
Amazing. And I love that. And I think you get a lot of that because you're not afraid to face up to the rough. So when you can handle the rough, the universe rewards you with making things pretty smooth in many ways afterwards. So if you can take the rough, you can get the smooth. I got a message to do more work online, which I thought was a bit odd and I wasn't really into, but I thought I'll just do it because in 5 or 10 years, maybe 50% of my business will be online. So I launched an online mentoring part of my school in January 2020. By March 2020, it was 100% of my business. If you remember this
I
little
love
incident in
that.
March 2020, and and
Yes.
and, and everyone was sitting around for 3 months thinking we're on holiday, and then for 3 months, oh, I better scramble and do an online business. In the meantime, I was working. Oh, I didn't have time to watch Tiger King. I was so busy and just so blessed. And I was also, the bad news was I was stuck on my own, but the good news was I had so many people to work with and did such great work that even these rough, horrible things, I was literally separated from my loved ones, which was rough, but things were smoothed in so many ways as well. And I see that as well. It's like, as a healer, as you go into meditation, you don't just get a glimpse of a past life, you get the full download and the full story. And that's wonderful. And that's one of those signs as well for healers. So that's one of the encourages that a lot of people who are healers or are on the healer's path watching this podcast. And so I'd want them to know that, it's not an easy road, but if you can stick with it, it becomes just magical and divinely guided and smoother than you can imagine. And that's where trusting. But if you resist that there's something wrong, that it's too difficult and you get off it, it's like waking yourself up in the middle of a dream before you get to the pot of gold. And you just got to keep being patient and persistent and you get the magic and smoothness that Stephanie's experiencing. And I think just such a wonderful example. So, yeah, so I want to thank you for sharing so much of your stories. And look, there are a bunch of stories I wanted to get to that we don't have time for, but you're not a psychic again, but you do animal communication with it. There's an eagle story in there, which is fantastic. And you're talking to animals. There are spirit stories. I'm particularly fond of as I, work with that and some of the people that follow me. So many great stories in there. So I really encourage people to read the book and be inspired. I learn a lot from it. Really enjoyed it. And so, is there anything you'd want to say in closing, but for as a takeaway, a last message for people?
Yeah, I guess what just came to me, Mark, was it's the three words that are on the front of my film poster when sparks ignite. And those three words are your period healing period matters, period. You know, that each one of us are those essential golden threads in the tapestry of humanity. And so each one of us doing our essential work at this time, it's never been more important because each one of us are light bearers. Each one of us are the light bringers. And so as we clear out our conduits, we are allowing more light, love, and healing to flow through us to the rest of the world. So I just encourage people to continue to do that beautiful self work, allow themselves to be priorities in their own lives. It's not at the exclusion of other people being priorities. It's just literally saying, okay, I want to help. I want to help. And the best way we can serve is by being the clearest conduits we can to allow that beautiful light, that diamond sparkling heart within each one of us to shine.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those messages. So, can you remind us again the name of the book and where people can find it and where they can find you?
Yeah. So the name of the book is Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. It's available on Amazon. And you can go to my website, which is stephaniejames.world. And that's where you can see the trailer to my film. You can see my other books, retreats I'm doing. And there's a free gift for your listeners, which is a beautiful guided chakra meditation. And it's just 10 minutes long, but it's a beautiful in the morning grounding meditation that I've just gotten so much feedback on that people love feeling like, oh, everything's lit up and centered. And it's a great way for us to come into our mornings.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being a guest, Stephanie. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. This was just so much fun. So wonderful being with you.